Hello, welcome back to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast. I'm Paul Mackey. So, I was on my 1-week trip to Boston and I heard the Internet Archive was still not doing too well. I had gotten my previous episode up before the trip, thankfully. After returning, as many of you may know, it was down entirely. Then after returning, it was not accepting logins for quite a while. I signed in successfully yesterday, so assuming they are accepting uploads, you will hear this episode today. So let's not waste time and get into Whiz Kids, Episode 8, The Wrong Mr. Wright, originally aired November 30th, 1983. That day of note, Radio Shack announced the Tandy 2000 running MS-DOS on an Intel 8186 processor. The computer was touted to be compatible with IBM XT, but differed enough that non-text-based software typically did not function correctly. So I'm now looking at back issues of Billboard magazine for this podcast, and there's a chart for computer game software. Number 5 was Bluemax from Synapse. Number 4 was Zaxxon from Datasoft. Number 3 was Choplifter from Broderbund. Number 2, the legendary Zork from Infocom, and the number 1 game was Loadrunner from Broderbund. A copy of Billboard that I'm looking at is actually missing the Hot 100 page, so I can only share the number 1 in the US from a different site, and that was the same as the previous week, All Night Long by Lionel Richie. In the UK, there is a chart available in here, and it says the top 5 were number 5, Love of the Common People by Paul Young, number 4, Never Never by a group called The Assembly, which is made up of pre-erasure Vince Clarke and Feargal Sharkey. Number 3, Cry Just a Little Bit by Shakin' Stevens. Number 2, the Paul McCartney-Michael Jackson duet Say, Say, Say. And number 1, Uptown Girl by Billy Joel. In the U.S. cinemas, number 5 was Amityville 3D. Number 4, Never Say Never Again. Number 3, The Big Chill. Number 2, A Christmas Story. And number 1 was Terms of Endearment in its first week of wide release. So, into the episode, The Wrong Mr. Wright. Summary. So this was not one of the episodes from the French DVDs. It's from a VHS recording that's been smoothed out in an AI process, and everyone looks a bit like they're molded from plastic at times. The audio isn't cleaned up at all, so there's a real buzz going on through a lot of the episode as well. I was spoiled by the French DVD transfers on the first 7 episodes. There are 12 episodes remaining, and only 3 more of the French ones, but I forge ahead. The episode opens with a boardroom watching some dramatized scenes on tape. This company is Compudate, and the presenter claims the majority of wealth in the country is controlled by lonely women, the people that their product was designed to serve. At the Adler House, Irene's date falls through for an upcoming charity event for which she is the treasurer. Later, the gang says Richie should get Farley to take her, but Richie says Farley told him he never goes to those events. Ham suggests a computer dating service, and Richie figures he can sign his mom up without telling her. He knows the guy who wrote the basic code that most of the services are built on. In an apartment tower, Farley tries to enter while the coroner is rolling out a body. Farley gets a peek at the deceased, Muriel Gregors, and talks to Quinn about her valued mentorship when he was in journalism school. Farley asks about the circumstances. It's an apparent suicide. Quinn shows Farley the note, but he still doesn't believe it. Richie and the gang look at dating services, and Richie settles on Compudate, then sets to getting his mom a profile. At Compudate, it's apparent they worked to bury an expose written by Muriel Gregors by literally putting her in the ground. Not only that, but they are targeting Irene Adler, charity treasurer in a new scheme now that she is one of their clients. Farley talks his problems about the suicide note with a coworker. The grammar and word choices are imprecise and uncharacteristic of Muriel Gregors. The coworker reminds him to find a date for the benefit. Farley calls to ask Irene. When she's not home, he tells Richie he'll be by later. As she arrives home, Richie takes the phone call from the Compudate stooge who has been assigned to con Irene as Mr. Wright. Richie gets Alice to pose as Irene, while Richie distracts Irene with putting away groceries. Alice gets him to agree to a date for coffee at the Burger Barn. Farley snoops at Muriel's apartment and finds a Compudate card with the name Terry Blair. Richie and the gang meet Mr. Wright in place of Irene, claiming she couldn't be there, and set out to interview him. Farley calls a number found at the apartment, and it connects to CompuDate, but the phone staff answer as a fictional company. Farley poses as a finance guy and asks about employee Terry Blair. The CompuDate computer system prompts the operator to report that he left a month ago. Meanwhile, Mr. Wright reports back saying his date was a bunch of kids and a dead end. The boss tells him to stick with it. Farley tells his co-worker it's all coming up dead ends trying to locate this guy. After hearing that Mr. Wright likes sushi, Richie invites him to dinner, then buys a bunch of sushi. He tells his mom that he's having a friend over for dinner with them, but when CompuDate calls her to welcome her to the service, it all comes out and she is outraged. However, when the alleged Mr. Dennis Wright is at the door, handsome and put together, she changes her mind and invites him in. Richie takes his sister to Ham's, leaving the two alone. It apparently went fairly well, as later Cheryl is back and asleep, and Richie is upstairs when Farley comes to try to ask Irene out. Richie tells Farley about the scheme he pulled, and Farley keys into the CompuDate name, deciding it's time to check them out. Farley talks to Humphreys, the executive from the beginning, and they have a discussion about Terry Blair, Muriel Gregors, and the withdrawal of large sums of Muriel's money at the bank. Wright offers to help Irene by doing the books for the charity as a donation, he claims. Farley asks Richie to hack CompuDate and look at Humphrey's files on Muriel and Terry Blair after sharing his concerns about the company. He also suggests checking out Dennis Wright while they're looking. Wright asks Irene to sign a form for her bank. At CompuDate, it sounds like that form was the power of attorney. Humphreys tells him to transfer the funds from the charity to their bank, then make for Venezuela. Later, at a payphone, it appears that Wright may mean to take the money himself, as he makes an arrangement to withdraw the $103,000 in cash, purportedly to show it off at the benefit. Cheryl tries to lobby to go along to the benefit, but Irene says it's for grown-ups. Cheryl lists off the bumper boats, water slides, and miniature golf at the venue and expresses skepticism. Wright isn't showing up, and over at CompuDate they discover the expected transfer was changed to a cash withdrawal, and he changed the Venezuela flight to a different one. Farley arrives at the Adlers, and with Dennis a no-show, takes Irene to the party. Ralph prints up Terry Blair's criminal record as well as Dennis Wright's criminal record. Richie and the gang rush to the party to show Farley the evidence. Meanwhile, it appears Wright has a change of heart. He hands off his ticket at the airport to someone and then flees the CompuDate executives who are chasing him. At the entertainment center, the gang show the printout to Irene and Farley, and they use Farley's laptop to access the bank's computer via the park's ATM and verify the bank account has been drained of $103,000. Wright shows up, and Irene pushes him into the water in anger, but he throws her the bag of money. Then the CompuDate guys show up, and there's a grand chase scene all around the various set pieces, the mini golf course, the go-kart track, bumper boats, pool, and finally the water slides. The crooks are captured, and Wright walks away. And my favorite line...
Unfortunately, the accounts receivables department is not under arrest.
Richie, we don't have to pay the bill. You do.
And the Who Is query. Madeline Kane plays Richie's mom, Irene Adler. Incidentally, considering the co-creator of the series Bob Shane later made a TV movie, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, the character name was clearly an intentional reference. Madeline was born in 1946, trained as an actress, and worked mostly guest roles, appearing in shows like Emergency, Barnaby Jones, The $6 Million Man, Quincy, and T.J. Hooker prior to the regular cast role on Whiz Kids. She had a guest role the following year in the two-part season opener of Simon & Simon, playing a different role. Of course, she was in the crossover Simon & Simon episode I shared with you earlier this year. She eventually transitioned into a career as an author, but not before some of the most 80s credits you can get, appearing on Mr. T's videotape Be Somebody or Be Somebody's Fool, and an episode of Small Wonder. That week in tech. I didn't really spot any distinctive tech in this episode that we haven't covered before, so I'll pull this out from the pilot. At the school, they work on an advanced computer. They don't highlight it, but it's clearly an Apple III. The Apple III was Apple's first attempt at a business computer, follow-up to the Apple II. It was an 8-bit computer running at a screaming fast 1.8 megahertz, equipped with 128K of memory expandable to 512. It was exceedingly flawed in its 1980 version, so Apple revised it. The revised model had a new logic board and lower power requirements. That's likely the model seen in the pilot. It sold for $3,500, adjusted for inflation. That would be roughly $11,950 today. It was still plagued by problems, allegedly due to problems with heat. Steve Jobs wanted it to have no fan and no air vents, ensuring quiet operation. Supposedly, the heat in the system would cause chips to dislodge, and there are well-known anecdotes from tech support that would often advise users to raise the front of the system 6 inches and let it drop to the desk to reseat the chips. Finally, in December 1983 came the Apple III Plus. This one sold for $2,995, roughly equivalent to $9,500 today. It fixed the design flaws, improved the video output, shipped with 256K of RAM standard, and used a keyboard more closely resembling the tried and tested Apple IIe keyboard. It's likely after Apple gave them the Apple III for the pilot, they asked the show to stop featuring it as the new model was preparing to ship. As the Apple III and Apple III Plus were on their way out, Apple had released the Apple IIe in January 1983 to resounding success, and also released the computer called Apple Lisa, with admittedly mixed results. Totally 80s. Yeah, I decided I don't want to fly there anymore. You take the ticket. Of course, these days, they're coming up on requiring specialized IDs to fly anywhere, but back in the day, it was a different story. It was probably definitely irregular just to give a stranger your paid-for ticket, obviously, but flying without a matching ID was completely possible. In the 90s, I flew the return flight of someone's round-trip ticket. I met them literally on a cork and thumbtack message board in college, so totally not far-fetched to see this kind of thing in the 80s. The airport was a little simplified for TV in the episode, though. I'm pretty sure even at the regional airports there would be some manner of security checkpoint before the guys could chase him down at the gate, as depicted. Artifactoids. Well, I had to track down the entertainment center shooting location. There is a chain of 3 amusement centers called Golf and Stuff in Tucson, Arizona, and Norwalk and Ventura, California. The Norwalk location has been used in films Midnight Madness and The Karate Kid. I believe this is the location depicted here as well. The Ventura location specifically features medieval theming. Unlike the Conan experience, they did not rename the park for television, and you can clearly see a Golf and Stuff Moroccan castle sign on the castle. The Norwalk was the original location, constructed in 1969 as Golf and Things. Then Ventura was built as Golf and Stuff in 1974. The company was sold in 1979, and both parks united under the Golf and Stuff name. The company exists to this day. So what worked in this episode? It was a multi-threaded plot that all came together pretty well at the end. The chase sequence at the end was a lot of fun, on par with the Conan one earlier in the season. What didn't work? Despite his change of heart, I didn't really enjoy Wright getting to walk away at the end without even a mention before the end of the episode. So next time is Whiz Kids Episode 9, Red Star Rising. Happy hunting! You've been listening to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast, produced by Paul Mackey in association with Nimlas Studios. Any short clips of audio from shows is included under fair use for commentary purposes, and copyright for that content remains with its original copyright holders. The theme song is Too Good by Jack Mangan and is used by his generous permission. One Idjit's Thoughts is produced under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can find more episodes of this podcast and many other fine podcasts at nimlas.org. You can contact me by emailing idjitcastpodcast@gmail.com or commenting on episodes at nimlas.org.
Let's make our own memories.
Not exactly sure why they had to hack the ATM to do a balance inquiry.